be here tonight.
This meeting is being recorded.
It's so wonderful to be here. I am honored to be back before you all after a couple of weeks away. And we waited for everybody to make sure that they had a wonderful celebration at Christmas and at New Year's. You all know one of my biggest thing is I believe that it's necessary for people to be together with family, especially during the holiday season. So I hope everybody had a chance to enjoy your families doing Christmas and doing New Year's. And it's so wonderful for us to be back here tonight. We are honored to be here right before you. And hope and trust we can say something that will help somebody along the way. So God bless you all. Before I really get started about what we are about here tonight, let us open up with a word of prayer. God, how we thank you for this tonight. We thank you for how good you've been to us and for what you've done, what we know you're going to do. And we ask that you would lead us and guide us and teach us this night in a way that will be pleasing in your sight. God, we thank you. We bless you now. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Well, we're here tonight, and this is on the eve of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And, this is when I wanted to come back. I know the State Baptist Convention had a program this evening at 3 o'clock, and I know a lot of Martin Luther King celebrations are going on. But I wanted to come in this manner because I thought it was good for prayers of living, through prayers of wisdom, to be able to say something in this level. So thank you all, those of you who have joined us live, and for those of you who will join us later. But we are here tonight to honor Dr. Martin Luther King and what we will be doing for the next few Sunday nights. I mean, I know Black History Month comes up in February, and normally we start doing Black History programs in February. But what we're going to do right here on this show, I can call it my show now, we're going to be actually doing Dr. Martin Luther King and Black History programs throughout, from now through February, to talk about the Black achievements and the things that Black Americans have been able to do over the years. And I mean, I've been doing so much research, and I want to encourage you all. It was my goal tonight to come up with a list of books to give you, but I'll wait till next Sunday night to do that, to give you a list of books, because I want to be able to show them on the screen. But I mean, I could just talk about so many books and so much research I've done, and it's been so uplifting, so amazing to know about our history. And so I want to encourage everybody here tonight who's listening right now to read about your history. Read African American books. Read, everything from seminary booklets to fiction booklets to non-fiction booklets. Read African American literature. It is so important. And then read articles. I mean, I've been reading articles from the Star Tribune, and even way back before the Star Tribune, I guess, in the early days of the Star Tribune. I was reading articles, and I found out a lot about Dr. Martin Luther King during his time here in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. But I also found out some stuff about Dr. Martin Luther King in Mankato. And I think it's important tonight that we can have somebody that was here during that time, during that season, to help us to discuss what the season was like then and what it's like now. So what do we need to do going forward to make sure that we can still have a dream? And Dr. King had a dream. Do we still have a dream today? That's the whole outlook. And I'm honored tonight to say we have Dr. Judge Lajune Lange. I said Dr. Judge Lajune Lange. I know that may not be correct, but Judge Lajune Lange that's with us. And who better to talk with us on this subject tonight than Judge Lajune Lange? We're so honored to have her here. As a matter of fact, I'm so happy that the song that we're releasing, Judge Lange, Jesus is the Answer. I heard this song actually when we was in Kenya. We was on a van going from between Nairobi and Eldoret. We was headed back to Eldoret, back to Nairobi from Eldoret, and Disha let me hear this song. I don't know where she got it, but she had heard it from some other Kenyans. So she let me hear this song. She like, Daddy, listen to this song. and it was a country white group singing, Jesus is the answer every time, every time. Jesus is the answer every time. And the people of Kenya was crazy about that song. And they was crazy about country music and about that song. I like, we got to be able to find a way to take this song and make it into a traditional gospel song. So ever since we was in Kenya, when I first heard that song, I've been trying to think of a way we could make Americanize that song. Should I say Americanize, Blackanize that song to make it feel as a gospel song that people will listen to. Jesus is the answer every time. So we took the tune, that tune that we heard there in Africa, and we took the tune of the Williams Brothers song, Jesus Will Never Say No, and we put all that together, and we simply said, Jesus is the answer every time. So that's where that come from. I mean, it took a lot of thinking. I mean, it seemed simple, but it took a lot of thinking to come up with that particular song, all the way from Kenya, and to bring it into America, and to actually put a tune to it. And Minister Darnell Davis helped me. I mean, wow, we worked together to put this song together to really make it, to Americanize it and to Black gospelize it. And here it is. Jesus is the answer every time. And it's available to you right now on all of your music networks. Jesus is the answer every time. It's available to you. I don't know, Shabby, if you can tell us something about where they can download it at, and whether the video is available yet. Then please let us know. But right now, Shabby, can you tell us where this song is available right now?
Wherever you get music from, it's available. So YouTube, iTunes, Amazon, wherever. It's available, and the video will be available in the next couple weeks.
Oh, wow. So you all, please, please, please go and download that song. Listen, that was my, I don't want to call it my retirement song, but that was something I wanted to put together for my last hoorah, so to speak, when it come down to actually singing and gospel music. And I put everything into it. And certainly it would be a blessing if you go and download it, and you could say, this is Pastor Russell's song. That is my song, and that is my single. And I got the wonderful benefit of having my brothers to back us up. Well, Pastor Chavez, first of all, is backing us up, but then my brothers and my little nephew, Kinsley, is backing us up as well. So it is a wonderful, wonderful celebration kind of song. And I beg you, please go and download the song. If you already downloaded it, tell somebody else to download the song. It will be a blessing to you. And really, it's like, it's a sermon that I preached. I took that song, June, we got it in to not Mississippi, but to Minneapolis, and I preached that Jesus is the answer every time, and then I put it into the words of a song. So when you listen to that song, you're gonna be like, Pastor Russell preaching. Yeah, I'm actually preaching. So
well, that sounds absolutely fantastic, Reverend. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. It was just, I mean, it is me preaching in a song. And that's what I've done over the years. I have not only have I been singing, but I've preached in my song. Matter of fact, I tried to not preach. I tried to sing it out before I would preach it out. And so every song I would sing back when I was 22, 23 years old, every song I would sing, I would end up preaching. And God said, nah, it's singing is good, but you got to preach. So I ended up going back to my roots, and ended up preaching while I was singing. So it is a wonderful, wonderful song. And I want to say to you again, it would benefit me so much for you to go in and download that particular song, because it is really helping our ministry. In this particular ministry, Pearls of Living, we have been able to reach out to many people across the country, not only through song, but even through the ministry that we do as far as helping churches. It feels good when a church calls you and asks you about what do we do now? How do we go through this situation? How do we get through it? And I want to say that I have been able to meet with several churches and give them guidance for the future. And it's been a big blessing to me to be able to give churches guidance, and that's the whole thing I'm trying to do. This ministry is not about me trying to make money or anything like this. It's about trying to help people, and that's what this ministry has been. We've been able to help people over the years. But Judge, I do say this: I have worked hard, trying to do this better together thing. I have really, after all the things that happened to me coming up through the years, it's amazing how I still try to say that we're better together. When I say that, I'm talking about black and white and all nationalities. It's good that we come together and we do this together. And the only way we're going to be successful is we do it together. I've tried to do that, but it seems like the more I try, the more some other things keep coming up against me to make me really feel like it's not even worth it. It's not even worth it, but talk about better together. Because, I mean, when I look and see the things that happened to me, Judge, I could have been Emmett Till several times.
Yes.
When I had, and I'm just gonna call it like it is, I had white women to lie on me and say things that I did because they liked me, I didn't like them. So what they did, they lied on me. And if my mama had not stood in the doorway to keep the police from picking me up, they came to kill me. They came to get me. They came to kill me. My mama stood in the door, pregnant with my youngest brother, saying, "You would get him over my dead body." She would not let him come in and get me. That was just one time. I got several instances like that where they came to get me. They came to kill me because I was a radical. I was not going to continue to say it's a white man's world. That's what I was told all the years coming up. Every time I look around, everybody from my dad to other people kept saying, "Boy, you better settle down because it's a white man's world." And I came to the point where I said, it's a black man's world too. So that's why I wasn't like coming up. And over the years, I softened up. I tried to, out of all the things we went through as far as Dr. King, I remember Dr. King. Lord, I remember Dr. King back as far as 1963, when the bombing happened there in Montgomery. Because Montgomery, you got to know Dr. King, he was really not, his daddy would want him to preach all the time and come to pastor the church with him. Dr. King was saying, "No, I'm not going to preach. And number two, I'm not going to come to where you are." But he ended up going to a church in Montgomery. And I've been to that church in Montgomery. I've sit in Dr. King's chair and I sit there and I felt the vibes from him and knowing what he went through, how hard it was for him to go through it. And I sit there and it's like my whole mind just began to download into what he went through. And it encouraged me to know that great people went through great things. Dr. King went through a whole lot of things to make sure that we are where we are. And even, you know what, Judge, he actually talked about things that made a lot of black people upset, and white people were automatically upset. But
Yes.
black people was upset too. I got tired of hearing white people say Martin Luther King, but I got tired of hearing black people saying Martin Luther King need to get somewhere and sit down because all he doing is hurting us. He need to really be quiet because we got it good here in Marion County or in Columbia. So Dr. King need to hush. And it was that time the bombing happened in Birmingham, and the bus boycott happened. I mean, I remember all of that like it was yesterday. I remember where I was when it happened. And I remember when Dr. King was killed, I had to go to school the next day. My dad had put us in this school with integrated improved school. That was the name of it. We integrated that school. And I had to go to that school the next day with people saying, "What happened to Martin Luther King?" I remember where I was the night it happened, but I remember crying all the next day because they talked about him so bad. I mean, it was, as a young boy, it was a very, very hurting time. And I could
Very
go on.
painful.
Very, very painful. I remember, like I said, I remember where I was. I remember what happened, and it was very, very painful time. So I don't know, Judge. I'm really at a crossroad here. When I look at where America is now and what it was then, I think that's so much more sophisticated now than what it was then, and they're trying to act like it's nothing wrong. But listen, Judge, I'm wondering about this Better Together thing. I am really, really at a crossroad tonight because I don't know whether we should go on and do our own thing or not, because we got a very radical moment. Because when I look at the article came out that said Trump had a mob and the king had a dream. I read that. Trump had a mob, king had a dream. So what do you see? We see right now, Trump's mob is still out there, but it's Dr. King's dream, is it living on? That's where I am right tonight, and that's where I hope tonight that we can look at some things that happened in Minnesota with Dr. King, and people don't even know about, because I've read about Dr. King in Mankato, Minnesota, and in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So, Judge, I'm glad you're on tonight because you were there, and I want to talk to somebody who was actually involved in everything that was going on when Dr. King came to Minneapolis. It wasn't like he was just in the South, but he had a reason for coming to Minneapolis. We know his reason for coming to the South. I mean, defending people who was denied the right to ride the bus and all that kind of good stuff. But he actually came to Minneapolis. Matter of fact, a year before he died, he came to Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And y'all, I have my Arizona Cardinals jersey on tonight. The Vikings not in the playoffs. The Vikings are dead, and the Arizona Cardinals are still alive, and that's who I am. So we won about my jersey, Arizona Cardinals. So, Judge, can you talk to us about what happened when Dr. King came to Minnesota?
Well, one of the things,
we thank you for being here tonight.
Can you hear me okay?
We hear you well. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Reverend, for the invitation to come. It's an honor to be on your program. And one of the reasons that Martin Luther King came to Minnesota was that 1948 speech by Hubert Humphrey that put civil rights in the front. And the Southern Democrats, Dixiecrats, left the party, and Black people across the country came and supported Truman and the Democrats. And finally, Humphrey was moving into the vice presidency and had some power to get the Civil Rights Bill passed. So in 1963, while that push for the Civil Rights Bill was coming, Martin Luther King came to Minnesota, and he came to Northrop Auditorium. I was not present. I was in high school at the time. So it would have been the elite who were ticketed to come to a reserved seating event at Northrop Auditorium that were present. But there were over 3,000 people at Northrop Auditorium who greeted Martin Luther King with a standing ovation after he presented his speech.
Wow, so you was in high school at the time when he came, and so he came to the University of Minnesota. And,
yes.
But that was the first time, but he came twice. And so if you was in high school the first time, what was the climate like when he came? The political climate, or the social climate?
The climate was, everybody was very nervous. My father had attended the March on Washington, which wasn't long before that. He had gone to the first March on Washington. There was a very active NAACP, African descendant people were very active. Our institutions, Black stores, businesses, newspapers, churches were very strong. And we were determined in terms of advancement of people. And so the churches had programs to supplement the high school education. so that we were confident in terms of our environment and our expectation to go to college, which our parents had impressed upon us. And most of us had parents from the South who'd left the conditions that you described to try to make a better life. And most of the parents, my dad was a mail carrier, and most of the other parents who worked in the Postal Service worked there because they couldn't get another job, even though they had a doctorate in chemistry or some other advanced degree. So we had a very tight-knit community that was determined to make things better and not to sit down and be happy with the status quo.
Well, can you kind of talk about what it was like? I mean, the political climate, the social economic climate, then when Dr. King had to come here, why did he have to come, compared to the Black Lives Matter and the other marches that's going on? Because listen, trust me, I participated in my marches growing up. When I was a young man, I can record several times that I marched. And I'm thankful that I did, because I felt like then marching was our only way of only voice we had, because nobody else was hearing us nowhere else. But when we marched, at least people listened to us. So can we compare then to now and see if we still having to do, why are we having to do the same thing now?
We had lunch counter sit-ins at Woolworths in Minneapolis. We had demonstrations. There were, when I got a job at a department store called Donaldson's, they put me in the basement. They had a unstated, but we knew, a skin color rule, so that if you were a certain shade of brown, you had to work in the basement, and only lighter skinned people could work on the main floor of the store. And so we had a lot of difficulty in terms of dealing with overt racism. There were jobs advertised and people couldn't get those jobs. People were fighting housing discrimination because landlords wouldn't rent to Black people. So there was a lot of discrimination in Minneapolis during that time. So Dr. King was very welcomed, and Minneapolis was linking with the national movement for civil rights, because we needed civil rights in Minneapolis just like the rest of the nation.
But you know, people were thinking that up north, that's what we came up north, and we really booked the Great Migration. You find that the people came up north thinking that it was better. So that's why I was so surprised to hear all the things that were going on in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with Black people. And that's why the people came to the north looking for a better life, not thinking we had to face the same thing that we faced down south. So are you telling me now that the same thing that was going on down south was happening in Minneapolis?
It was the same thing. So the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was only for Black men, and they couldn't get promoted to any other job on the railroad, was active in Minneapolis and St. Paul. The single race job of being a porter or a red cap or a sky cap, any of those jobs were still present in Minneapolis. Being a person with an education, having to be the person passing towels out in the restroom was, or the elevator operator, was still happening in Minneapolis in the 1960s during this time.
So the bottom line, it was happening in Minneapolis, St. Paul, what was happening down in Columbia, Mississippi. So Dr.
Yes.
King had a right to come here and organize a march. And just like he had a right to organize a march down in Montgomery, Alabama, Birmingham,
Yes.
Alabama, where the Bull Corners and all those people were. So he had a right to come to Minneapolis, St. Paul, do the same thing, because it was not like what we perceived. It was not better to come to Minneapolis or come up north. It was not like things are better.
I went to apply for a job at the telephone company to help support my way through college. I was hired. My father drove me down to the job interview. I told him I got hired. He was so excited that he went in and thanked them and said, "Oh, this will help my daughter pay her way to college." And soon as he said college, I was fired. I had no
Oh,
job. They did
mm.
not want anybody with aspirations for anything other than being their slave. So I had a job for 40 minutes at the telephone company. And that was the kind of experience that we were going through in Minneapolis.
So that was actually in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, you actually got fired because your father said college.
Yes.
Wow, I hope somebody hear that tonight to know, do you think that you're okay just because we're in Minnesota? I hope you hear that tonight. And in hearing that, you know that it's not, we can't just sit back and do nothing. We're still in the middle of this terrible process, even after all these years. And as Dr. King died for it, and like I say, anybody that did great things, they end up having to actually die for it. Dr. King died for this. And here we are still facing these same things today. I mean, the same things. And I'll be honest, it makes me, I have to use the word angry to see that we are the same place now that we was back then, all these years ago. And to see that people's mindset have not changed. There are some people right now who think they're over us just because of the color of their skin. And when does this change? That's I mean, and why am I the one that had to keep on compromising? I'm tired of doing that.
Well, Reverend Martin Luther King and many others have said the forces of nullification never stop to rest. So there's always somebody who's trying to hold our head under the water. Martin Luther King also said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so if people are suffering in the South, if they're trying to take away the vote today in Atlanta, Georgia, they're going to try to take away the vote tomorrow in Minneapolis. We cannot feel like geography is going to prevent us from suffering all over again the struggles that Martin Luther King gave his life for.
Wow, and that is I mean, that's very profound to say that we think just because we're up north that we're okay. That's happening to them down in Atlanta. I mean, they actually, I mean, literally down south right now, they are taking away districts where they keep Black people from having the majority in voting. I mean, that's actually happening. And then when you see President Joe Biden trying to do something about it, they are condemning him. I'm like, so where are we? I mean, and if we think we are okay in America, we are not okay. And what these people are talking about, they're talking about the next civil war, and we'll sit around killing each other and talking about each other like we are okay. We are not okay. That's what I'm trying to get across tonight.
One of the other important things, Reverend, is that we have an election coming for sheriff of Hennepin County. So we have a really good candidate who's running for sheriff, Sawana Kirkland. And we have to make sure that people we can hold accountable are in those positions. Because as we talked about Bull Connor being such an obstacle to Martin Luther King, the role of sheriff is a very important job. And we have to make sure that the right person is in that position.
I remember Bull Connor and I remember George Wallace. Lord have mercy, these big political figures who actually, I mean, they didn't mind people knowing who they were. I mean, they stood and basically said what Black people will never do. And Dr. King stood and said, oh, yes, we will. We will do it. But you know what got me judged back then was there were people who, I mean, Black and white, who did not like Dr. King, did not like the work he was doing. There were people who actually said, I heard it so many times, Dr. King ought to get somewhere and sit down because he caused us more problems. And the white people were already saying it, but then the Black people were saying it too. They put it in their heads that we didn't need to be any better. And I'm thinking right now that's kind of like the same voices I'm hearing today, that you all ought to be happy with what you got, sit down and shut up. What do you think?
Well, there was a Mississippi commission that exposed a number of so-called Black leaders that were on the payroll of white supremacy groups getting paid to obstruct. And so there's always people who will accept money or volunteer to oppose the rights of their own folks. That's just something that has been as old as time. So it's unfortunate that people choose to side with their oppressor, but it should not stop us from doing what is right, because the time is always ripe to do right.
So, and I want to say, if you all got questions, Shelby, I don't know if anybody put anything in the chat, but if you got questions, put them in the chat. We're willing to talk about it here tonight. And anybody got any experiences you want to talk about? Let's talk about it, because this tonight really determines where we go for the rest of this series. We're not going to just do a Dr. Martin Luther King series, but we're going to be doing this series in Black history from now through February, maybe even longer, because I think it's time for Black Americans to rise up and realize what's happening to us and let us join together. I guess my thing is now that Black people got to realize, first of all, that we're better together. Rather than just Black and white being together, Black people got to be together first and realize what's happening to us. And that ought to bring us together, join us together, and to realize that we are not what we think we are. Dr. King stood for all this stuff. And don't you think that just because he stood for it and was killed for it, I mean, he actually was killed for what he believed in and for better things and wanting us to be a better people. And here we are today, and we're still fighting the same battles, but then we're fighting more against ourselves. I mean, it's always been since Gorey Allen, Dr. Judge June, since Gorey Allen, how peaceful Gorey Allen was. We're gonna have to have a session when we talk about Gorey Allen in South Africa, where we came from. Talk about how peaceful it was before white people came and intentionally caused dissension. And that same thing right now, when you're talking about the money that people are receiving right now, the same thing, people would take $1 and, I mean, to cause dissension in their own community. That is not started happening. That was happening since Gorey Allen, when we were a very peaceful people. We was not a people who was drinking and cussing and fussing and all this kind of, but they came and brought guns and alcohol at Gorey Allen, and that's the result of where we are right now. So we're gonna definitely have to have a session on that. But can you talk about anything that the deceptiveness over the years?
I think that one of the challenges that we have had is that people want us to be peaceful, which is having a peaceful life is important, but peacefulness does not replace justice. And that was one of the things that Martin Luther King linked together. It wasn't just peace alone, but peace with justice. So justice doesn't mean just the absence of violence. It also means health care. It means a job that pays a living wage so that you can look after your own children. It means having access to vaccines and access to time off, and being able to have the opportunity to pay for an education. And so now in Minnesota, we're at approximately 27% of Minnesotans own their own homes. If we look back in history in terms of living in Minnesota or living in the South, we came up from slavery and got our own houses because we knew how important land was. And now we've become almost a landless people, subject to the will and whim of others right here in Minneapolis. And we could, for redistricting, they could declare public housing to be a gentrified, and Black people would have to move. So we have a lot of issues where we are in a precarious position right here in Minnesota.
Well, I found out about when you talk about gender fires and all this. I found that out when I was actually living in the parsonage in South Minneapolis. I was surprised to find out that there were certain spots, and when the parsonage was right on the verge of that spot where Black people could not live. I mean, you really was still not allowed to even go in that area, and a lot of people don't know that's still true right now.
Yes, the redlining is a fact. We still have problems in terms of getting mortgages or being shown property in certain neighborhoods or being financed. So there's still obstacles, both overt and by practice, keeping Black people out of certain neighborhoods.
But when did you actually, when you started being a judge, was it after Dr. King or was it during that time?
I became a judge in 1985.
Okay. So you had seen all this stuff that happened, and then you had to go and be a judge after all of that, and you were seeing all of the results that Dr. King had made a difference. Everything is okay now.
I became a public defender after law school because I saw that Black people really needed good legal representation and they weren't getting it in the courts. And so I became a public defender by choice to try to make a difference to people who were accused who did not have money to hire their own attorney. And while I was a public defender, a man by the name of Rudy Perpich, who was an immigrant from northern Minnesota, became governor. And my boss told me that Rudy Perpich wanted to make the bench look like the community. And at that time, it was mainly gray-haired white men who were judges. So I applied and was appointed by the governor to become a judge, but I had to go into that whole cohort of gray-haired white men. And we had a expression, thank the Lord for attrition, when it was time for them to retire and we could gradually replace them with people who wanted to make a change.
So did you say that, I mean, and all this was happening years after Dr. King came to Minnesota, you became a judge years after because you wanted to make a difference. So
yes.
So would you say now that that's still necessary years after Dr. King came here? And I mean, where do we stand today? Can we say, okay, Dr. King had this dream, so now we can dwell in this dream because everything is all right now? I mean, what are we saying? Although you became a judge after Dr. King came here and marched for social justice, for our rights, and people really looked up. I mean, people in Minnesota, all my reading, oh, they really respected him. They was happy he came, and Mankato, they was happy he came to Minneapolis the first time. They were happy he came back the second time. And so I'm thinking maybe he made a difference, but then come to find out you had to become a judge years later because he was still trying to stand up for Black people. So where do we stand today compared to then? Is there still a need for I have a dream? The dream already been accomplished.
There's still a need for action. The forces of nullification are like the tide that comes in on a regular basis and wipes out whatever happened the day before. So the nullifying forces are not going to stop trying to erode and return us to that slavery level that the country was founded on. So we have to keep fighting and keep repairing the breach and keep insisting on equality and protecting each other in order for these rights that we have gained to either stand or we have to fight for more. So nothing is going to happen because someone feels like, oh, we're so sorry, we've hurt Black people for this many years, let's stop. That's not going to happen.
So you're saying that there's still a need for a voice like Dr. King, or there's still a need for, because right now it looks like when we march and protest, that's the only voice we have. So are you saying that there's still a need for that in Dr. King's day?
with Dr. Martin Luther King, we have oversimplified the movement. Dr. King had strategists, he had psychologists, he had
Right.
ministers, he had women, and he had the bankers. And one of the bankers has not received his just due, who just passed away, and that was Sidney Poitier. And Sidney Poitier was one of the bankers, along with Harry Belafonte, to help the movement, to be able to finance the work, bail people out of jail, fly to Ethiopia during a famine, just to be able to serve with his blessing, financial blessings. And so Dr. Martin Luther King talked about being a pilot with a ground crew. He talked about all the people that have to coordinate, that have to share the vision and have to work to get to the destination. So we have to remember what he poured into us about that collective network that we need to put together and keep together.
But what happened? I mean, when Dr. King was doing so well, and then you would think everybody was for him, but then there was a group of more radical people that rose against him and thought he was not doing enough. I thought he was not doing the right thing. I mean, and that still happens today when we, within our own circle, we started to come against each other. So I want people to know that it was not just say hunky-dory with Dr. King. Everything was not just all right. Everybody was just not on board. But there were some people who actually said, you're not doing enough. We need to be more radical. But Dr. King, and even especially when he started talking about the Vietnam War. I mean, can you talk about that? What happened with that when he started to kind of shift gears?
Well, fortunately, we were given the lesson plan in the book of Exodus, where we learned about leaders who were anointed, and there were grumblers and people causing dissension. We learned about that kind of character and that kind of festering cancer that could impact the future of the entire group if they swayed away from the goal. And so yes, in the work that Martin Luther King did, there were splinter groups, there were people who were opposed, but Dr. King was able to rise above that dissension and also bring in allies of people who had been positioned to oppose him. And so he had an ally in a number of people that history is not really ready to talk about, but he had great allies that supported what he was doing. And so Martin Luther King started to talk about the Vietnam War, which was swooping up the Black community, young Black students trying to
I remember.
aspire were getting swept into the war and put on the front lines. It was our first integrated army, fully integrated army was Vietnam. Oh boy, napalm, a guerrilla war, and suddenly the brothers are invited to be full participants in the first US Army war that is a war of horror. We're put on the front line.
How I do remember those people who, I mean, was actually drawn into the war, going to fight a war, and then next thing you know, their bodies coming back. I remember many bodies, that came back. I mean, it was just a body. It was dead. Going to fight into the war, they really didn't know what was going on. But I remember so many people in my little small community of Blue Spring. There was so many of our young men in that small area that ended up going to fight in that Vietnam War. But then I also remember, like I said, how the people were, when Dr. King began to speak out against it, they was really against him then for talking about war. They wanted him to stay centered on the social justice issues here in America. But I think that was one of the social justice issues, would put us in a war where we couldn't even be treated fairly in America, but then they were sending us off to a war to fight for freedom. But we was actually living in a country where we wasn't free.
Well, we had we had a president who, Lyndon Johnson, was in favor of Vietnam, so he was really irritated with Martin Luther King for speaking out against the war. But King was being consistent in terms of speaking out against immorality.
No. Shelby, are there any questions that's coming to the chat we need to answer before we continue with the conversation?
I will say, Brother Joseph Waters, he said, Black history is American history, and we should be talking about this every day. So it just brings up the point that when will we have the opportunity just to call it all just American history, and we don't have to carve out Black history and Asian history and all these other history months. You know, it can just all be encompassing. So, and then to your commitment as Pearls of Wisdom series is just to celebrate Black history more, just overall. So what are your thoughts on that? Black history is American history.
Judge, you want to answer that first before I go? I can.
Well, I think we need to educate ourselves each and every day about our history. We need to educate our children, our families. We need to have that origin, have those stories, have those accomplishments, have the data really impressed upon us, because we will not receive our full due from external sources. So it's our responsibility to make that Black history an everyday part of life, because it is the history that we carved out on American soil. So we need to know it, and we need to expect that other people will want to know it, but we must know it for ourselves.
Judge, I can say that, you know, I really think it's important for us to really understand our Black history in America. I mean, because I was not taught anything other than derogatory stuff about African Americans when I was in school. And it's been amazing to me, even through seminary. They didn't get, we had all white books, no Black books, because they said there was no Black authors. That's not true. There are so many Black authors, so many Black writers but it's stuff that they did not want us to know. So I'm happy that it shouldn't have to be set aside for us to do this. But at this point every year, I mean, it is certain that we should look into our history, see where we come from, and actually be intentional about reading Black books and about understanding our Black history, because we were not taught that. People they don't want us to know these things. And I've been amazed. The books I've read, I mean, you know what, if you want to find out what's really going on in America right now, read President Barack Obama's book. I mean, that really let me know what's happening in the Senate and the Congress right now, the House legislature right now, because of what President Obama went through, because of our Blackness. I mean, what people said to him, what they said about him, and what America did when he got elected. I mean, the way he spelled all it out, it's a big book, a long book, but it's necessary. President Obama told the whole story. So it's stuff like that. Yeah, you need to read that. Don't just take somebody else's account. Take President Obama's account. You want to read a book like How the Word Is Passed. If you want to know what happened on Goree Island, what happened in all these, the prison in Louisiana and in North Carolina, South Carolina, and in Louisiana, Mississippi. If you want to know about these things and know why people are still doing that now, we got to read about it. They don't want you to know that. But you got to read about how the word is passed. Read about reading while Black. I mean, these things, because, I mean, reading while Black says the South got something to say. I mean, and they keep on saying the South got something to say. But they want to put all that aside and say we don't, that coming from South, coming from Mississippi, they don't make us look like we don't have anything to say, or make us look stupid. But that's what they want to do. But when you read about it, you know the fights and the marches and all the stuff that went on to try to get us to where we are. And then when you read about the Great Migration, that's a big book too. But the Great Migration tells a lot of stories why people were getting out of the South, trying to come north because they thought it was better north. They thought it was better coming to Chicago or coming to Washington, D.C., or coming to L.A., or coming to New York. They thought it was better. Nobody mentioned about coming to Minnesota, by the way, but we do have the history of that coming to Minnesota. But I'm just saying the bottom line is all these things that we don't know about. That's why it's necessary, at least during this time of year. I would say, yeah, Black history all year round, but at least now, let us learn something about our history, because if we don't learn about it now, we're going to end up going back to the same thing, because there's a group of people out there right now who are talking about, I mean, very strongly, Judge, they're talking about the second Civil War. And we can't sleep on this. There are people who are buying ammunition, and they're positioning themselves, they're training their children to shoot guns, and they are preparing themselves for the Civil War because they feel like they are threatened. White people are threatened. Black people gonna take this place over. People of color gonna take it over. So we gotta rise up. That's where this whole Trump thing came from.
Well, one of the beautiful things about having Barack Obama as president of the United States, I was fortunate enough to go to the inauguration in Washington, D.C., and watch him receive the oath of office to become our president. And the sky was gray, it was chilly. And when it was time for him to come out and take the oath of office, the clouds parted, the sun came out, and the rays of the sun were like fingers coming down from the sky. It was like a movie set. And it was like God is smiling on this day. And so God protected Obama and his family all during the presidency. And when, as you say, people were running out and arming themselves, but he allowed him to serve our nation and do it well. And so that quiet dignity that Obama possessed, that quiet dignity that Martin Luther King and Coretta possessed, are legacies that through it all, we can have grace and dignity and be servant leaders. And so when a man cannot be a man, he can be a monster. And the person that you were talking about rising up was unsuccessful as a man, so he's working at being a monster. And so we have to have the discernment to understand that will not meet a good end. And we have learned through history and through really documented accounts that kind of figure has a hard fall in the end. So we have to stay in our lane and ask God to move those big obstacles out of the way, as they did for King and they did for Obama, so that we can carry out our purpose.
But Judge, I remember when I was when I went down to I had a chance to visit the African American Museum there in DC. I had a chance to do that, but I also have taken the tour from Atlanta through Memphis, Tennessee. I mean, down through Georgia and through Alabama and through Mississippi and back, and ended up there in Memphis. Or should I say we ended up at the Dr. King burial place there in Atlanta. I've taken that tour, and in taking that tour, the thing that was really, really meant most to me, and that what the Spirit of God really spoke to me, when I went into the church where Dr. King pastored there at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and I sit in his chair, I had a chance to actually sit where he sat. And when I was able to sit in that chair, I mean, I can't even describe what went over me. And would let me know, because at that moment, all I was thinking about was dying. And I was thinking about that we, all the stuff we've done, but like still African American, we're dying. Because I mean, everything from healthcare to unemployment to housing, all I was thinking about was dying. But the word that the Lord gave me while I was sitting in that chair was like, live. Stop thinking about just dying, but you got to live. But in order to live, you got to do what Dr. King did. You got to speak out. You can't just sit back and just do nothing. You got to live. And it's okay, because that time I was really pushing better together. It's okay to say we're better together, but you got to also don't let nobody put you in a position where you feel like you're nothing. You feel like you're nobody. You gotta demand respect. I got all that sitting there in that chair, and people wonder why I wouldn't get up. I was sitting there because the Lord wouldn't let me get up. He was speaking to me, sitting there in that chair. He was speaking to me that this is the word for now. Dr. King sitting here years ago. He was killed because of his belief sitting right here. But now you are here, and I'm telling you right now, you got to live. What do you need to do to live right now? And
Well,
that was
the Lord completed the circuit, because he not only had you sit in the chair of Martin Luther King, he had you stand by the jail cell of Nelson Mandela
oh Lord,
and
did he? Yeah.
understand the struggle. And Martin Luther King spoke out demanding the release of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. That's the kind of voice. So you've completed that circuit both in Alabama and Georgia and South Africa, so that you are plugged in, filled up, and ready to go in terms of carrying out the message.
Oh, how I cried when I was in that cell and was able to. My mind went back to the books I read and the stories I've heard. I mean, you talk about deep pain and deep suffering and crying that went on in my spirit. Oh, it was just like when I sit in that chair at Dr. King's church. So, Judge, our time is almost up. I'm going to ask you to come back again. I'll get with you next week to see if it's going to be next week or the following Sunday. But this is our Black History series, and this is what we're going to be doing for the next month or 6 weeks here on our show, because we want. I mean, you know what? I can say what I want to say, and can nobody tell me don't say it. It's time for us to speak up, and I think it's time for some stuff to be said about Black history that we have kind of backed off of. But the more I read, the more I study, the more I learn. I'm like, this need to be said. This need to happen. So that's the reason why on this particular show, we're gonna cover everything from education to health, everything about where we are right now. You're about to say something. So your final thought for tonight.
Well, thank you very much. The preachers are the center of Black history in America. And so you have been anointed to carry that message. And I thank you for the opportunity to be on the program.
Well, Judge, we will be back in touch with you. But thank you so much for tonight. And I think a lot of people have been enlightened, and we're going to be enlightened even more as we continue to read books and go forth about our future. So thank you. God bless you. We'll see you all next Sunday night. God bless you. Good night. Good night.